In the tense spring of 2011, as the winds of the Arab Spring swept through North Africa and the Middle East, Libya stood on the brink of catastrophe, and the world watched a nation fracture under the weight of protests, retaliation, and a regime unwilling to loosen its grip, setting the stage for an international intervention that would be known as Operation Odyssey Dawn. The story begins with the stark contrast between the hope-filled chants of peaceful demonstrators in Benghazi and the thunderous response of Muammar Gaddafi's loyal forces pushing west to east, reclaiming cities with artillery fire, tanks rolling down cracked highways, and aircraft strafing rebel-held districts, all while the United Nations held urgent meetings over grainy satellite images that showed the unmistakable movement of armored columns toward population centers. And as diplomats debated resolutions, the world's media captured desperate pleas from civilians who feared that Benghazi, the cradle of the uprising, would be wiped out within hours if the international community did not act. In Washington, London, Paris, and across NATO's command structure, planners pored over maps of Libya's coastline, studying targets, air defense networks, and the positions of Gaddafi's elite brigades, while coalition leaders weighed the risks of intervention against the consequences of inaction, recognizing that the regime's looming assault could result in mass atrocities. So when the UN Security Council passed Resolution 1973 authorizing all necessary measures to protect civilians and establishing a no-fly zone, the gears of a multinational military operation began to turn, and within hours, US naval vessels in the Mediterranean pivoted toward launcher-ready positions as cruise missiles were programmed with coordinates for Libyan air defense sites, radar stations, and hardened command bunkers. On March 19, 2011, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the coastline darkened into an outline of jagged silhouettes, the opening salvo of Operation Odyssey Dawn flashed across the sky as more than 100 Tomahawk missiles vaulted from the decks of US destroyers and submarines, streaking towards SAM sites and surveillance systems that posed the greatest threat to coalition pilots, their impacts sending shockwaves through command centers and shaking the confidence of loyalist troops who suddenly found themselves in the crosshairs of the world's most advanced militaries. Overhead, French Rafales soared into Libyan airspace as the first coalition fighter aircraft to engage Gaddafi's forces directly, intercepting loyalist convoys moving toward Benghazi and destroying armored vehicles moments before they could enter the outskirts of the city, buying precious time for civilians and rebels alike, while British Typhoons and Tornadoes followed with precision-guided strikes that targeted ammunition depots, runways, and aircraft shelters, ensuring that the Libyan Air Force would struggle to mount any coordinated response to the unfolding operation. In command posts aboard the USS Mount Whitney, officers monitored live drone feeds, satellite imagery, and a constant stream of radio updates as coalition aircraft, American F-16S, F-15Es, Marine Harriers, Canadian CF-18S, Qatari Mirage jets, Italian Tornadoes, and Danish and Norwegian F-16S rotated through strike missions, target suppression, and armed overwatch patrols, each flight representing a carefully orchestrated effort to dismantle Gaddafi's ability to wage war against his own people without endangering the civilian population the mission was designed to protect. And as the hours turned into days, the night sky above key Libyan cities became a canvas of tracer fire, streaking flares, and roaring jet engines as coalition forces neutralized radar arrays, anti-aircraft guns, and command nodes, reducing the once intimidating integrated air defense network to scattered, isolated pockets that no longer posed significant risk. At street level, Libyan civilians watched from balconies as coalition aircraft conducted low passes, their presence signaling a turning point that emboldened rebel fighters who regrouped, reorganized, and began reclaiming towns that had been lost in the rapid loyalist advance. And across the eastern half of the country, makeshift hospitals that once braced for waves of casualties found small moments of relief as the pace of shelling slowed under the protective umbrella of the no-fly zone. Meanwhile, the political dimension unfolded with equal intensity as NATO debated the transfer of operational control, eventually assuming responsibility for the mission on March 31st under Operation Unified Protector, a move that transformed Odyssey Dawn from a US-led initial strike campaign into a fully coordinated multinational effort that integrated intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, maritime patrols, and air operations into a single structure designed to maintain pressure on the regime while upholding the strict legal mandate to protect civilians rather than pursue regime change. In the Western Mountains, Rebel groups coordinated with coalition aircraft through newly established channels, using encrypted radios and spotters to mark loyalist artillery positions threatening towns like Zintan and Milat, enabling precise strikes that dismantled long-range cannons and Grad rocket launchers that had terrorized communities for weeks. And along the coastal corridor, from Misrata to Ras Lanaf, the sound of jets became the soundtrack of a shifting balance of power as Gaddafi's forces struggled to adapt to an environment in which every armored movement risked detection and rapid destruction. Yet the operation was far from simple, as coalition pilots navigated the challenge of engaging mobile targets, sandstorms, and dense urban areas where loyalist troops often positioned themselves near civilian infrastructure, forcing the coalition to weigh each strike carefully to avoid unintended casualties. A restraint that shaped the pace and scope of the campaign but remained essential to the mission's legitimacy. As weeks passed, the international coalition continued relentless pressure, targeting supply lines, communications arrays, and staging areas while ensuring that humanitarian corridors remained open for medical aid and relief shipments. And the world watched as the uprising gained momentum, pushing westward until it reached the outskirts of Tripoli, where the final battles for the capital unfolded amid chaotic street fighting, wavering allegiances, and relentless coalition overwatch that prevented loyalist aircraft or heavy armor from turning the tide. Ultimately, the collapse of Gaddafi's grip on power marked a dramatic turning point in the Libyan conflict, though the post-war period would introduce new complexities and challenges for the nation. But within the scope of Operation Odyssey Dawn itself, the intervention stood as a defining moment when the international community acted swiftly to prevent a large-scale massacre, blending diplomacy, military precision, and multinational cooperation in a mission that reshaped the course of Libya's 2011 uprising. And as the operation concluded, coalition ships gradually reduced their presence. Aircraft returned to bases across Europe and the Mediterranean, and commanders reflected on the unprecedented coordination between nations that came together not for conquest, territory, or strategic gain, but for the protection of civilians facing overwhelming force, leaving behind a legacy both heavily debated and undeniably consequential. A chapter in modern history where the roar of engines over Libya signaled not destruction for its people, but a shield raised in their defense. And as the lights dimmed on the battle-scarred coastlines and the world turned to new challenges, the memory of Odyssey Dawn remained a reminder of the stakes, the risks, and the profound weight of decisions made when the world stands at the crossroads between intervention and silence.